Recording here. Okay, so today is November the 17th, 2025. We're discussing Parshat Toldot. Toldot, a fascinating parsha. You know, with Chayesara, the marriage of Isaac to Rebekah, the death of Abraham, Abraham's beginning to populate other nations, that parsha functions as a transitional parsha uh, in the story of the patriarchs. Um, Toldot, this parsha, is really the probably the only parsha that deals in any great focus on the life of Isaac and Rebekah, and even then, with the life of Isaac and Rebekah, it does transition very quickly to Jacob and Esav. Um, and I've been very attentive on the reading this year to try and focus a little more on Isaac. I've always felt, even though my namesake is Yitzchak, that Isaac has gotten short shrift. I mentioned, in last week's parsha, especially in Shul, I talked about the fact that um, you know, we are all so influenced by Sigmund Freud in the way that we interpret the Parsha, that we tend to think that Isaac marries Rebecca as a replacement for his mother. And that theme is a very, very strong theme in modern commentary, uh, specifically because of that verse which says that Isaac brought her into the tent. He married her and he loved her, and he was comforted after the loss of his mother. And and I mean, I don't know, Stanley. I'm just going to put you on the spot here. A good Freudian is going to say what about that? Stanley, just just put your straight.
All I can say is yes, indeed.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so the parshanut, the interpretations that I was bringing last week in Shul consisted of the good slam line, smackdown line, which is Jews are reading the Torah many, many centuries, good 2,000 years before Sigmund Freud. And so they must have had other interpretations of this passage rather than what has become the dominant interpretation, which puts Rebecca as a surrogate for his mother, Sarah, and makes Isaac look like a bit of a mommy's boy, um, a subordinate, submissive, passive figure. And I'm pushing back against that portraiture of Isaac and offering the idea that in fact he was, or and in fact that we could plausibly create a different portrait of Isaac, someone who is a significance, someone who has a stature, someone who is a person in his own right of wealth, prestige, honor, integrity, and love. And that when it says that he loves her, it's actually a genuine love. And when it says that he brings her into the tent, one ought to read that metaphorically, not that he brought her into her tent, Sarah's tent, but that he brought her into the role of the matriarch. And I think that that's a very plausible reading of this. I I wrote it up in the Parsha sheet and last week. I don't know if it got distributed, but you might want to take a look at that. At any rate, so I'm inclined on this year's reading to see Isaac in a much more favorable way, or as a much more interesting character, notwithstanding the fact that there's not much said about him. And so we're going to go into this week's parsha, um, and I'm going to do it slightly different, in a slightly different way. I came across a very interesting article by a scholar whose work I sometimes look at and like, Yoel Ben Nun, Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun. teacher of Bible in Israel, Har Etzion. Susie, you're familiar with him. I like his approach, and there seems to be a school of you know contemporary teachers in Israel who have very, very close readings of the text. I believe they've all been heavily, heavily influenced by Nechama Leibowitz, which is a good thing, and others who read biblical texts very, very closely and are trying to, you know, pull out from the text different kinds of archetypes and different kinds of styles and different a non-traditional set of interpretations. Like, for example, Rashi, we would call a traditional interpretation. He gives you the verse, he gives you the simple interpretation based on midrash, and that would be traditional. These modern writers are looking at many texts together and trying to come up with various lines of argument, and I've been following in that way. I very much enjoy that study, and I think I'm very influenced by it. So he wrote an article, Yossi Ben Nun, in which he talks about Shlosha Sugei Nisuin. Okay, now I have is the left I have the Hebrew, and the right I have a Google Translate, which I massaged a little bit. He talks about three types of marriage, and he's specifically focusing on the marriages of the patriarchs and matriarchs. Okay, so there are three models of marriage in Abram, Sarah, Rebecca, Isaac. I'm sorry, Abram, Sarah, Isaac, Rebecca, Jacob, Rachel, Leah. Okay, of which you could say Abram, Sarah, Isaac, Rebecca, and really Jacob, Rachel. Leah is not is not the primary marriage in the story of Jacob. So off the top of your heads, okay, knowing the stories as well as you do, what do you think those models are? And let's just talk about Abraham Sarah for a second. What's that marriage? How has that marriage come to be? What is that marriage? Go ahead, Alana.
Sarah followed her husband to an unknown land.
Okay.
That shows a lot of devotion.
Devotion. Okay. I'm so glad you mentioned it because already we're going to have a very big conversation with Ben Noon. Okay, Susie, go ahead.
Yeah, so we don't know how Abraham and Sarah got married. They're just like
Okay.
they come as a pair,
Yeah.
and Yitzchak, is fixed up,
Yeah.
and Yaakov chooses his wife, and
All
then
right. So
he has another one
there you
dumped
have
on.
headlines. Okay, Susie has headlines there, and we're going to go to Nanette, and then we're going to Ruth. Go ahead.
But wait a second. I gotta say, I can't say, wait a second. So, I mean, the fact that Sarah told Abraham, her husband, look, buddy, Hagar's leaving. Take the kid out, out. And he listened. So
Good point. Yes.
to me, I can't help thinking maybe it's a setup for the tribe, maybe for other Jewish men. I mean, I don't know.
Okay,
But
hold that,
it's
hold it, hold it. And then Ruth, go ahead.
Uh, actually, Rivka one up Sarah. Ilana said that Sarah followed Abraham to an unknown land, but Rivka followed Eliezer not only to an unknown land, but to an
Okay.
unknown
I
man.
love it.
Like, who the
Okay.
hell is this?
Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
And
Perfect.
what and one more thing,
Yes.
and Rivka was the second Yitzchak and Rivka. Yitzchak was the only one who had only one wife. Everybody else had
Okay.
more than
So
one.
so so what these last 3 minutes have shown is that whenever we're going to see what Ben says in a second, and you can see that we're all in disagreement with what he says, which is great because it's that whenever you try to kind of and really we are shoehorning these marriages into certain paradigms, and there is a sense that we are um, in we're in conflict with this. So I'm going to go to what he says, and you're all going to react in a certain way. Okay, first he says, in the lives of the patriarchs, we find three different family models of family life. שלושה מודלים שונים של חיי משפחה. המודל הראשון, the first model, הוא המודל של אברהם שרה. Okay, model of Abraham Sarah. הם יצאו ביחד, they went out together from Haran to the land of Canaan. שניהם היו קשורים בדבר השם. They were both connected to the word of God. This is a debatable thing. Is that in the text? Not clear, okay? Certainly Abraham was, but Sarah, we really don't know from the text. And then he goes and he does a little bit of this is what I would call a little bit of sleight of hand, because he throws in the Midrash. Chazal afifligu v'amru shesara hayta gdola mi'Avraham b'nevuot. She was greater than he was in prophecy, says the rabbis. That's already a very, very interesting claim. I have a footnote here because I'll give you all the sources for that. That Sarah was a greater prophet than Abraham. You're shaking your head. Okay. All right. The second model, model hasheni, or model shel Yitzchak v'Rivka, model of Isaac and Rebekah. They were married. B'shiducho shel Eved Avraham. He was on a matchmaking mission. Okay. And only after they met in the land of Canaan, after Isaac brought Rebekah to his mother's tent, it is said, and he loved her. Okay, the third model is the model of Jacob and Rachel, which is next week's Parsha. Jacob fell in love with Rachel at the well, and he desires her. And from that moment on, his love was given to her. Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah were forced upon him. Fascinating, okay? So the primary driver of the life of Jacob is his love for Rachel. Each of these models has its advantages and disadvantages. Period. Okay, so I love the way he puts it, and what is so fascinating here is that it puts it at least attempts to put these three marriages into three discrete boxes. Abraham and Sarah. I think of Abraham and Sarah as a royal couple. Okay, he is the firstborn. He is an extraordinary figure. She is an extraordinary figure. They're a couple. Isaac and Rebekah, that's a shidduch, okay? And the shidduch is arranged by parents, most notably fathers. It's the marriage of fathers, and we'll talk about that in a second. Jacob and Rachel, it's the marriage of love, okay? And see what he did? He put them all into nice boxes, okay? And I'll just, I have my summary paragraph here. Here, the summary: the couple, marriage of notables, both have status in their families, both have a divine connection, both are formidable in their own right. Isaac and Rebekah, it's a marriage of a shidduch, arranged by fathers to serve a purpose, that is to build a nation. Jacob and Rachel, it's a marriage of love intended for family, but becomes a love relation and has a tragic dimension to it. As a love relationship, you get the sense, and we're not going to focus on that today, is that the focus of when there's love, there's going to be tragedy. There's going to be tremendous disappointment. There's going to be tremendous, heartbreak, and there's going to be tremendous anguish, which in fact is what the story becomes. Go ahead, Ilana.
Who is the stronger side in the marriages? Well, Isaac and Rebekah, obviously, to me, she seems later on stronger and more influential. Abraham and Sarah, I tend to go towards Sarah more, but they are a little bit equal. Rachel and Jacob, it was just love, so who cares?
So that all of that is a valid point, and I think this is where we're all going to have our interesting conversation and debate, because we'll start with Abraham and Sarah. Is it a marriage of equals? Is it a marriage of let's start in a different place, which is to say, how would you characterize Abraham and how would you characterize Sarah? Is Abraham the dominant and Sarah the subordinate? Or is Sarah the dominant and Abraham subordinate? Or would you say that there are times when he is dominant and there are times when she is dominant? So we're all nodding at the third one, and that's where we're inclined. So you know, in a marriage where the the partners are equal, that is to say, they're formidable in their own right, or in a marriage that functions in the way that it's hard to characterize one kind of marriage as healthier than another kind of marriage, because the people in the marriage are wired to be that way. There are certainly marriages where let's say the husband is dominant and the wife is submissive, and it works for them because that's the way that marriage works. All right, and there are marriages that are complete opposite, where the wife is dominant and the husband is submissive, and they all enjoy that. It's a good marriage because that's the way they work. And then there are married. I don't want to say most marriages, but there are marriages in which the husband has his role, the wife has her role, and they interlock in a way that works for that marriage. That marriage becomes a creation of its own. And so there are times when the wife is dominant and runs things, and there are times when the husband is dominant, and then there are times, I would say as a joke, where the wife lets the husband be dominant and think that he's dominant even though she's running the show. Right? Because we all understand that, we all recognize that. And
Rabbi
so
Hiltz used to say that.
yeah, exactly. So in some ways, we're going to project onto the canvases of these marriages certain kinds of qualities that we recognize. And I would, just argue that before we even get into any rabbinic interpretation, uh, there's an argument that could be made that Abraham, of course, is dominant. God speaks to Abraham. That's traditionally the way I interpret it, that Abraham is the person with whom God makes the covenant, and that Sarah is subsidiary. However, there is a certain time when Sarah is dominant, and that it becomes important to God, no less than God, that the child that will be the head of the nation, or will be the nation, be the outcome of the union of Abram and Sarah. That's not a small thing. That's a very, very big thing. And so that means that she has a very significant role also. We got a lot of hands here. I saw Bob first, and then John, and then Susie. Sorry, go ahead.
They named the son because she was laughing.
And she was, well, he laughed too. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they both
He
laughed.
did. He laughed at the end of
It
Parshat.
says that למה צחקה שרה? Something.
Yeah, no, but she's there. He laughs at in end of Lech Lecha, Parshat Lech Lecha. All right, just hold on for a second. I'm gonna just pause for a second. 1 second. Sorry. Okay. So we have all that. Let's go. We had Bob, John, and then Susie. Go ahead.
Yeah, if my comment doesn't fit where you're taking this, then park it to the side or
Okay.
ignore it. But I have a problem because I don't understand the word model. For me, I'm looking at this as a discussion of the challenges in relationships and the challenges related to forms of free will being taken on between the men and the women involved. So I don't look at this as models, but as with all the other things that have been about challenges of Abraham and Isaac and that this now becomes a first set of discussions around how do you navigate the free will of the men and women involved here.
Okay, so very, very insightful comment, and I endorse it, and put it on a side that said that obviously is one way to read it, and because you're reading with a different set of themes here. I think it's a natural inclination for us, especially as Jews, especially as like synagogue Jews, who are going to hear this over and over again in sermons and wedding talks and eulogies and all that. We use these patriarchs and matriarchs, we use all the biblical figures as models. I mean, they're there accessible to us as a model. And so, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've used, Isaac and Rebekah or Rachel and Jacob in a wedding talk, but a wedding that takes place around this time of the year, it's gonna happen, naturally. In fact, my latest, as I move through, in these years, I try to avoid, these kinds of, they become cliches in a certain sense. And if you've been to a number of weddings during the fall months, you've heard these sermons 100 times, and it's like, okay, can you give me something new? And I often feel that if we resort only to that trope, that the idea of models, we're not doing it. We're getting lazy. Okay, notwithstanding that, they present themselves as models. I mean, I could look at, we all have parents, and they all had marriages. And, those of us who knew grandparents were able to see those marriages. And I could spend hours talking about the models of relationships that I've seen both in my own family and as someone who observes community. And these these models, again, we force them into the boxes, you know, and are what are their characteristics? Look, each marriage is going to be different, but is there a larger model? Perhaps. And what he is attempting to do here, the writer, Bin, he's trying to make these into these characteristics, into these archetypes. They fit and they don't fit. Go ahead, John.
Well, talking about dominance, and this is something I would say it's more than it's something that's despicable. I don't know if that's too strong, but when Abraham goes down to Egypt and tells Pharaoh that Sarah is his sister, puts her to save himself. I think that's
Yeah,
the not only there, but I think he does it a second time with
sure.
another, and
Avimelech,
I
yeah.
think Isaac does it.
I think does it too.
So that's kind of an interesting theme, and it doesn't speak well of the husband.
No, it does not. There's just no way I could wriggle out of that one, and try to. I mean, we all try to engage in our apologetics about Abraham, trying to save his skin and all that, and we've all read those kinds of commentary. At the end of the day, so it's an ends and means kinds of thing, and I mean, I really shoot myself in the foot by saying, here's a model of a marriage that but nobody should emulate it, which is to say, it's a model of a marriage. I'm going to say it as a joke here, but if you were to model your marriage after Abraham and Sarah, and your wife says to you, are you going to do that to me? And you would say, well, I'm modeling the marriage after Abraham, and therefore I would. And, the wife should say, over my dead body, are you crazy? Do you think, there are limitations here. Susie, go ahead.
Well, so the Midrash talks about the Abraham and Sarah having their their own spaces, where Abraham would be Megayer the men, and Sarah would be Megayer at the women. That they were both evangelists, so to speak, and they
Yes,
were. Yeah. The other thing I just wanted to say about Yoel Ben Nun, he was in the unit that fought in '67 that captured
the Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, and
Yeah.
I've heard him speak about that. The original plan was not to liberate that, and he was part of the impetus for that. But that's a
Right.
different
He's
story.
an interesting character, very interesting. So yes, the Midrash does create, and the Midrash is going to base itself on text, and will spin a story that has a textual, foundation to it, and that's what makes it Midrash. It's not shot in the sense that the plain reading of the text takes you in a different direction. Just I'll give you an example. I'll show it in a second, which is, the claim that Sarah is a prophet is a midrashic claim. Nowhere in the text do you have that. So the pshat, the plain interpretation, is that she's his wife. The pshat is that somehow she is related to him because there is this avi yiska avi. The way that her genealogy is given is somewhat ambiguous, and the pshat, the plain interpretation is in the times that there are interactions between Abraham and Sarah, and she says some very strong things, especially in the chapter 21, when it was mentioned, she says to Abraham, get her out of the house. And God says to Abraham, you listen to her. Now, God says to Abraham, you listen to her, because what Sarah is doing is quite objectionable. She's forcing the ejection of the co-wife and the son. And to Abraham, who has notwithstanding the fact that he wanted to pawn his wife off as his sister, Abraham does have a strong moral spine to him. This violates his sense of morality. And God has to step in and say, no, you got to do this because the plan here is that Isaac is going to inherit it. And this is only going to create complications. And so, yeah, you have to do this. It's very, very difficult for him. And he has to listen to her. Ilana, go ahead.
I'm just thinking of Eshet Chayil that we say, supposed to say every Friday night. We say to the woman, to the wife, and it's probably because we have examples in the Torah that the three mothers or the four mothers were Neshot Chayil, women of valor. There's nothing about Ish Chayil, maybe something else.
There are, yeah, okay. So there are things that can be said reciprocally to the man. Ashrei Ish, it's Psalm 112 that is sometimes said. And Eshet Chayil is a customary thing. It's the chapter from the book of Proverbs about the woman of valor. And it's all of these are salutations. And I wouldn't even go as far as that. I would say, the way that we bless our daughters at the Friday evening table is Yisimcha Elohim Kesari Yivkarach Leah. May you be like Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. I mean, that you don't have to say much more than that. Be like them. And so what are we doing? What we are doing is basically calling to mind the best qualities of these four individuals, and we're saying emulate them. We're not saying, I had to say, when I bless my daughters, I'm saying be as obstinate as Sarah was when she wanted to kick Hagar out, be as emotionally voluble as Rebecca was, be as temperamental as I'm not saying that at all. We're looking to the qualities of their honor, their place in our family story. I just want to say this because I want to get myself into real trouble. But there is this conversation in non-Orthodox Judaism, specifically in the conservative movement, about the Shemona Esrei when we recite the Shemona Esrei, and whether we include the imahot in them. So there's Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. That's the traditional saying, and there are those who want to say Elohei Avraham, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Yitzchak, and on that, and I'm I don't want to say adamant, but I've been opposed to adding the imahot in. Um, I don't, I'm opposed to that for a lot of reasons. One especially, which is that the formula of the opening of the Amida is a formula that comes down to us over, death almost 2,000 years, and maybe more, maybe 2000. Um, and there's a lot of chutzpah in inviting a change for that. Um, and it just says, okay, so we're accepting a kind of feminist reading of the Torah when that feminist reading is not the simple interpretation of the Torah. There's an argument to be had there. But the covenant is made between God and Abraham, and not between God, Abraham, and Sarah. Sarah plays an important role. They all play an important role, but the covenantal formula goes through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that's what we're invoking in this. And that's the debate that we all have in this moment. My last argument is like, when you are a recipient of a traditional, when you're a recipient of uh, an heirloom, a cultural heirloom, you don't make modifications to it because they don't meet your own moral sensibility. I'll give my favorite example is um, when they turned Beethoven's Fifth Symphony into a disco. I don't know if you recall that. There's da 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 da, and so they made someone said, well, let's make the Fifth Symphony into a disco, and to classical musicians, it was awful to hear that. There's a certain cheekiness to it. Uh, but what it means is, are we, within the scope of interpretation, at what point are you actually changing something and distorting it beyond its origins, um, to the point where it no longer resembles what it was? And there's some of that argument there, but that's my soapbox for today. We got who would I miss? Ruth? Ruth, yeah.
Uh, okay, so you just said one of the things that I was going to say, that Sarah showed her dominance when she said to kick out Hagar and the kid, and that was obviously not at all what Abraham wanted. But also, I definitely disagree with Sarah having greater nevuah. If Sarah had such great nevuah, Abraham and Yitzchak wouldn't have taken that little stroll. That wouldn't have happened. And as far as Sarah following Abraham, when it was time for Yaakov to go back home, he had a discussion with both Rachel and Leah, even though Leah was not the loved one, saying, "This is what I have to do. I got to go back home now." We don't know what happened. We don't know if Sarah and Abraham had a discussion and whether she agreed to go, whether she thought it was a good idea or a bad idea.
Well, I agree with you on every count. In fact, I would raise you and say that they really don't have a discussion. That Abraham goes initially on his own, maybe half a mile, and then realizes that he has to go back out of his sense of loyalty. The Lech Lecha, and my colleagues really kill me on this interpretation. They really disagree with me on this, but I'll say it anyway. It's directed to him personally, and he's got to leave everything, including his wife, and that's where they say no, it can't be that, and I say no, he's supposed to leave his wife, but what happens is he goes back to get her, and what that shows is that he will not violate his loyalty to her, even if God says to him, I want you on the solitary journey. And the reason why I say that it's a solitary journey is because all heroes in all literature, especially founders of religions, go on their own and they don't bring their wives. And Abraham, it's this fascinating distinction. Abraham, as a founder of a people, uh, actually brings his wife.
And one more thing with Sarah. She's obviously very controlling. She's not at all nice to Hagar. She kicks him out twice, right? I mean, later on, way down back in the Torah at the end, it says how you're supposed to treat your servants. Sarah doesn't follow any of that. I mean, she didn't read that part yet. It wasn't written, but Hagar got left and came back and then got thrown out permanently. So She definitely was capable of being a not nice person.
Okay, definitely. All right. All right. Let me go. Susie, you have one comment there?
Yeah, too. So I have a neighbor who, Carol Diamond, who was the head of the, I think she was the head of the late lamented Hadassah education department, who's as feminist as any of them.
Not
And
late lamented.
she says that, if somebody were to get up and quote the Gettysburg Address and say,
Right.
407 years ago, our forefathers and foremothers, somebody would say, wait a minute, that's not what it says.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's what to be said for a canonical text.
Yeah.
All right.
The other thing is that, where do we get that phrase from? Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov.
It's also
That's how God introduces himself to Moshe.
indeed. All
Yeah.
right. So what we're just saying that it's a progressive play, which is we have to rewrite the Torah, whichever. All right. So the claim that Sarah is a greater prophet is derives from this moment where she kicks out Hagar and God says to Abraham, "Don't let it be bad in your eyes, the lad concerning your maidservant," and all that Sarah says to hearken to her. So the rabbis are reading that and saying, well, of course, hearken to her. She's a greater prophet than you, right? And this is Rashi. We may infer that Abram was inferior to Sarah with respect to prophecy. He's basing that on this midrash from Tanchuma. Kol asher namar mikana talamed sheya Avraham tafel l'Sarah b'neviut. He was less than her, right? And okay, so that's a claim that is made, and it's a midrashic claim, and then this is I would put this in the category of take it, put it on the table, drink a glass of wine, have a conversation about it, and say, what is this trying to say? It's trying to say that in this moment, she has force, and she's to be reckoned with. Um, and there is a dynamic at play between husbands and wives in general, consistent with what we with our choice of answer C. That is, marriages that work are the one model of a marriage that works is that no spouse is submissive to the other. Rather, there is an interdependence between spouses in which one spouse does one thing, another spouse does another thing, and they both depend on each other and share with each other all of the tasks of life. When I counsel, when I'm meeting with prospective brides and grooms, I try to say to them, there's nothing equal in a marriage. Don't, take out the word equality, because it's not the word that really matters. Because if you use the word equal, then you're going to tend to keep score on certain things. And who can evaluate, what the score is when, of your hours in laundry folding versus your hours in cooking, and your hours in doing the shopping versus your hours or your task in doing the. I mean, it becomes kind of ridiculous if you are keeping score. And so in a marriage, everybody has to extend themselves beyond what they think is their share, because that's how it works. And there are some times when one partner in a marriage is going to be overextended, and another is going to have to support, and that's just the way it works. And I find observing these marriages that in fact that's the case where each spouse really goes above and beyond to the other. Okay, I'm going to go into what he says here now. He says, I'm going to do this quickly because I'm not really focused on Jacob and Rachel. The price of Jacob and Rachel's love marriage is the risk that love will turn to tragedy. And he has a good sense here. Rachel was barren and did not give birth to Jacob. Sorry, Rachel was barren and did not give birth to Jacob, while as other wives, the hated ones, gave birth. I'm sorry, Lo Yaldal Yaakov. She didn't give birth. She didn't bear children to him. It's the wrong translation. While his other wives, the hated ones, gave birth to many sons, and in the end, after giving birth to two sons, she died in front of Jacob. She died before, she died while he was alive. It is precisely the power of the love between them that intensifies the tragedy, and Rachel's tears echo for generations in the air. Okay, he's alluding to Jeremiah and Rachel is crying on in Kol Rachel Mevaka. The price of Abraham and Sarah's marriage of honor, nisui kavod, is the friction that inevitably arises when two people of equal rank live together. This is awesome, okay? Abraham had to conquer his feelings of kindness in order to listen to Sarah. And when Sarah heard about the Akedah without Abraham telling her anything about it, her soul withered and died, according to the sages. In other words, he did things that he had to subordinate, and she had to subordinate, and there's a tragic outcome to that as well. Now, when it comes, the most notable price is the price of Isaac and Rebekah's matchmaking marriage. Nisuei Shiduch. Okay, their marriage is made as a matchmaker. And you can see here that this is a modern rabbi kind of saying arranged marriages, you pay a price for them, okay? Throughout their entire married life, the abysmal gap between them is evident. Ha'pa'ar ha'tehomi benehem. There's a real big gap between them. And here's where I'm going to invite all of us, including me, to disagree with them. Sages insisted that there was also a large age gap that could be true. There was a mental gap between them. I'm not sure. Yitzchak v'Rivka einam mesugalim lanel b'neihem b'sicha pshuta. They can't have a plain argument between them, a conversation. Mitzad echad, Yitzchak hu shatkan. He doesn't talk. He's quiet. Maybe that's a result of the Akedah. He likes action over talk. Ma'adif asiyah al pnei diburim. On the other hand, Rebekah feels that she is not on Isaac's level and that she has no common language with him. When the boys wriggle inside her, mitrotzetzim abanim bikirba, she doesn't tell Isaac anything and goes to seek the Lord. She may have gone to Abraham, she may have gone there and she passed by and certainly didn't tell Isaac anything. This is the basis for the argument that will arise between Isaac and Rebekah later. Rebekah knew that the two boys in her womb would be separated into two nations and two peoples, but Isaac didn't know this. Never had God so blatantly discriminated between two brothers. Ishmael was not Sarah's son. Jacob's sons were all chosen. But Isaac could not have known that God would discriminate between the two twin sons and choose Jacob over Esau. Isaac loved Esau because he loved the taste of game. He saw him as the firstborn son who would lead the extended family. Rebekah knew that each son was a people in his own right and therefore loved Jacob. The gap between the two parents also affected their relationship between their sons. Esau lived in the field, wore a hairy cloak, and hunted. Jacob was a man of tents, not dressed like Esau and engaged in spirituality. Every character in the house of Isaac and Rebekah lived alone. It is Chaya levada. Isaac prayed alone in front of his wife. Pregnant Rebekah did not share the word of God with her husband. Jacob and Esau were almost diametrically opposed to each other. Thus, a destructive platform was created for the differences of opinion that erupted so blatantly in the story of Isaac's blessings. I love this reading because I put it on the table. I say he's making a very good case. He's making it. What his case is well, there was explosion in the family. The family, maybe implosion. The family kind of collapses because of the difference between the husband and wife. And he claims here they're not the same. They're certainly not the same in age, and they're certainly not the same in intellect. Okay? And because of that, this one is attuned, Rebekah is attuned to the prophecy or the oracle that there will be two nations, which she hides from Isaac. She doesn't tell him this. It's a secret, okay? So there's tension in that, it's dramatic irony because we know, but the characters don't know this. She knows that there are going to be two nations. Isaac doesn't know this, and she will live life accordingly. She will organize life accordingly. Now, I I I'm I react to this statement that there's an intellectual gap between Isaac and Rebekah. Not that he is smarter than her. I think I would argue with Bin Nun and say, I'm not sure that's correct. In fact, the opposite is true. The opposite is true. You could argue that Rebekah is in fact smarter than Isaac. She's much more forthright than Isaac. And in my conversation with my colleagues about Rebekah, Rebekah is the analog to Abraham. There's a directness to her. She's aware of things. She is the one that moves the story forward. In a sense, I'm back to this characterization of Isaac as being passive. I want so much to resist that, but I can't help it. She is dominant in this moment. Without her, there would not be, the unfolding events of the birthright and the blessing. And you could then argue that were it not for Rebecca, as we do argue, we would not have a Jewish people. So Rebecca is central to this. Rebecca plays the most important role in the transition of the blessing because she sees in front of her own eyes what these two sons are. Isaac loves Esav, Isaac loves Esav, Rebecca loves Jacob. Isaac sees certain things in Esav and then is blind. In fact, Isaac is blind to certain other characteristics of Esav. One second. And Rebecca sees this and is inclined to this. What he said, the last thing that he said, I think resonates very deeply, which is here's a family in which everybody has their own room, right? Everybody has their own private room. And everybody is living their lives out in their own way, and that they're not functioning as a family. I want to take this. I mean, like, I want to get so involved in the story I feel that there's so much voltage in that statement that the family, every single person is on their own. It's almost as if I say this, knowing that this is the reality for many, many families today, that you can go to a someone's family table and everybody will be on their own screen. Everybody will be on their own phone, their own iPad, their own thing. It happens, and you go and you can stand up. It's maybe a caricature or a cliche, but you step aside from that and you go like, wow, everybody's on their own thing. I'll give you just one more example, which is, you know, it used to be that we all sat, I mean, back in the time when we were all growing up, most of us, and maybe, a little older, in the 60s, you sat down and you watched things together as a family, okay? There was network television, so everybody was watching it, you know. And I watched a rerun of an episode of MASH recently, and I'm going like, boy, I remember the times when we all used to sit and watch this together. And part of the sentimentality of watching these old shows is not the shows themselves, which were in themselves really quite good, but it's the nostalgia of, we all sat around and we watched this together. Okay. Today, nobody is watching things together. I mean, I've had this my own experience where you can sit, everybody has their own thing and they're all watching something different, you know? So there's something here that he's saying, which is that this family is not working as a family. And yet it all happens. Okay, we got a lot of hands here. And then I'll let you go here. Go ahead.
Yeah.
You got unmute. Go ahead.
Okay. So, Rabbi, I ask you once again, at what point do you think, or maybe this is the point, that Rebecca, maybe she didn't realize she was a prophet, or maybe, I didn't realize that she did not tell Isaac about what, God said she has two kids as is this going to be a nation. So is it at this point that she became a prophet?
So I would just put the term on the side because the text doesn't use that. But you're quite right. what the text says is that God spoke to her, or that she gets an oracle. How does it say it? That I have it in front of me. It's in this text here, which is okay. So um, she goes to inquire of God. Vayomer Adonai la, God says to her, Shnei goyim bevitnech, two nations are in your belly, two tribes from your body shall be divided. Tribe shall be mightier than tribe, elders shall be servant to the other. Now we could spend a whole day on that alone, but at the on the surface of that, what you have is well, God speaks to her. Now you could say, well, God speaks to her, that therefore she's a prophet. Okay, fine, but so there's a message that is received that God speaks to her. Now, the interesting thing is that we tend to interpret the message as being very unambiguous. That is clear in the sense that the older will serve the younger. In fact, it's actually not so clear. It's the older, the younger shall serve, or the younger, the older shall. I mean, the Hebrew is ambiguous. So, like all oracles, it's how you interpret them. Now, what I will say is that and again, it's the trick that we all use in interpreting. Okay, I use this all the time. The text doesn't say that she shares that with Isaac. Now, because the text doesn't say that, I can conclude that she kept it a secret. That's plausible. Or I could say, look, the text doesn't say that, but there's no way she didn't say this to Isaac. Okay? It's as if you were to say, when it says back in chapter 22 of Genesis that God's angel spoke to Abram and said, Abram, don't slaughter the child. And then the angel speaks to Abram a second time and says, you're going to be, all the nations of the earth will be blessed through you. And the text says the angel spoke to Abram, but Isaac was right there. So you're saying, well, it was, not oral, it didn't, all that. You can say that God didn't speak to him, that Isaac didn't hear it, or you could say, no, Isaac, it's God speaking to Abraham, and Isaac overheard. And you could say the same thing here. I mean, look, you almost want to say, I almost want to, in a normal marriage, in a good marriage, you go get an oracle from God, you're going to come home and say, Isaac, I want to tell you what I did today. Isaac, I went to here, I got an oracle, and the oracle said da 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 da. And the proof that she doesn't tell this to Isaac is what happens. She keeps another secret to him. Look, in the way she behaves later on, which is totally manipulative. She totally manipulates the story and structures the story around forcing Isaac's hand. And she hides from Isaac the reality. Instead of saying to Isaac, listen, we have a problem here. The problem is Esav, our firstborn, is not worthy of this blessing. Yeah, you love him. I understand you love him, and but this is what he's doing. This is who he is. This is his character. And God has promised us that you're going to have a great nation. And this is not, you have a problem here. You have to solve this problem. We have to solve this problem. She doesn't say that. Instead, what she does is she manipulates and she hides the fact and she creates this great, theater here. And she pays a huge price for it, by the way. Nobody in the Bible gets away with it. She pays a huge price. What happens? She loses both her children. Esav leaves home and Jacob leaves home, and Rebekah is not heard from again. That's I read it with a certain sense of tragedy that we really don't know anything more about her after these stories, because she says at one point the ironic statement that is the truth. She says, I don't want to lose both of you in the same day, and she ends up losing both of them, and they don't come back, and there's no interaction between Jacob and Rebekah ever again that's recorded. All right, we got Susie, we got Ruth, we got John.
So I'm not sure how I'm going to deal with this Lidrosh et Hashem, but I'm not surprised that she doesn't share this Hitrot Tzitzut B'Kirba with Yitzchak.
With Yitzchak.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking, looking at a traditional society, a traditional Asian society, somebody's having bothered by symptoms of pregnancy, she's going to go to the local midwife and talk about it.
Okay, and, you know, she does. I mean, Isaac prays on her behalf. So, and here again, you know, the character portrait that I have is much more favorable to both of them. I actually think they have a loving marriage. I've said in the past, I think all the marriages, they have the most functional marriage of all three of them, right? I mean, I make the case against the marriage of Abram and Sarah because they're really divorced at the end. They're in different places. You know, she lives in Hebron, he lives in Beersheba. What's that about? Okay, Jacob and Rachel, they love each other, yeah. But he says cruel things to her. He's absolutely cruel to her, and he's vicious to Leah. It's really. I mean, we should be ashamed. But Isaac loves Rebekah. It says so clearly. He loves her, and they have a marriage that is, you know, alive with lots of intimacy and sexuality. You know, they go to Avimelech and he sees them. It says beautifully in this parsha, you know, they go down to this area in the Philistine area and they're in Gerar, and you know, because of the famine, and he spots them mitzachek. Yitzchak mitzachek et Rivka ishto. And it doesn't mean that they're playing, you know, Scrabble, right? You know, they're fooling around and in a very sexual way. And he sees, and the window is open. I mean, it's just it's remarkable the way the Bible presents this story because it's loaded with sexuality. And so you say to yourself, wait a second, here's a marriage. The two of them have struggled for 20 years to have a child, and then they have children. And then the story tells us that they go off to to the area in the in south, and there's a famine there, but there's plenty of love making there, at least. Good marriage. Go ahead, John.
Well, you that's just what I was going to say. So the theory of, I forgot his name, Bournoon, that he totally leaves that aspect of it out.
Okay, that's right. So here's an arranged marriage which actually functions and it's a full sexual marriage, and he leaves it out. Good. I'll have to write a letter to him. Go ahead, Ruth.
Okay, so first I have to refute your statement that nobody watches anything together, because although you can't see him, Larry's in the room and he's been listening to
There you go. Okay, good.
Okay.
Hi, Larry.
So the next comment I'm going to attribute to him, because he said if Rebecca would have told Isaac the oracle, the whole subterfuge when it happened, the whole subterfuge wouldn't have had to have occurred, because Isaac would have known then that the whole story would be continuing through Yaakov.
Okay, so there's a claim there that we could acknowledge. We could validate that claim, you know, in the sense that you know the story has to unfold the way it unfolds, and therefore, you know, there's a nice line of midrash that says that Isaac really knew all along. Okay, on the other hand, there's a counter argument that says the oracle itself is ambiguous, and it really depends how you read it, to whom it's referring, and that requires, you know, a much more a magnifying glass to look at all the way the words work. But take it, it's an ambiguous oracle, as most oracles are. Yes, go ahead, Bob. You gotta unmute.
Sorry, I'm going to go out on several limbs, if I might.
Please.
A modernistic limb would be that there's not one person more intelligent than another, but in fact, there are multiple forms of intelligence being exhibited: IQ and EQ and spiritual intelligence and social intelligence. And so to me, that's a story that tells we've got to value different forms of intelligence.
Okay.
Now, since you invited me to say something Hasidically or something like that, then I'll offer the following. I really do like the idea of Isaac being much stronger than people give him credit for. And some of the things that I've read most recently from a Canadian Hasidic rabbi was that a lot of this discussion is about internality and externality. And that what I mean by that is some people look at externality, and Esau is very much with that, with the red and the hairy skin and all that. You get this whole description of the externals, whereas with Yaakov, it's much less, it's much more internal. And Yitzhak is very much like that. And they said that just like you flex your biceps, the question is, how do you flex your inner spirituality or flex your, if you will, gevura? And so part of what's there is the incredible strength that Isaac has to be able to stay inwards in that. But on the other hand, he's not wrestling with the external world as much. And that's sort of Yaakov's challenge to come, which is blending those two sides. The interesting line that I'm most curious about was the thing about the taste of game and people seeing that only at the physical level. But one of the things he said is that in order to connect with Hashem and the future, it's actually the physical world that has to be elevated. And so this was another way. So what does taste of game mean from a spiritual sense? And I'm curious what the rabbis say and what you say on that.
Well, I don't have a lot to say about it other than Isaac has a certain desire, and here I think it's the desire for this non-sedentary life. I see in that moment not the spiritual, realm, but a very, very personal, brotherly realm, and that is, here is a man whose brother essentially was, an archetype of Esav. Ishmael is certainly a much more outdoor and public persona, and Isaac likes that. I often, I often fall into a certain kind of trap when I talk about this. Is when I think about you know my upbringing, and I think we all played hockey when we were kids, and we all loved it. And in my cohort, my friends, their kids really play a lot. They play, and some, couple went on to really, almost professional careers. And it looks so clear that they're living out vicariously the dream of their parents, their fathers. And there is something here in the sense that Isaac has one kind of life that was given to him by his father and aspires to another kind of life. And that's what that story is. Now, of course, we can read a lot of metaphor and symbolism in this, and that this is where I choose to go with that, or that it's drawn to me in that way on the basic human level. What he's saying is it's missing. Now, there's an interesting vein of interpretation which says that Isaac, he may have been a certain diabetic. He may have been he had certain tastes in his life. There were certain deficiencies. You can go in a lot of different directions with that. I think that by liking the taste of game, it signals that he wants a bit of the wild in his life, and he's domesticated. And what's so ironic is that in the scene where he says to Esav, "Go out and get me some game like I like," what happens? The mother overhears it, and she makes him a Hamish good meal. She says to Jacob, "Go get two goats and slaughter them, make them, and I'll make him food that he likes." And what that says so beautifully is that he is so attuned. Isaac so much wants the field, the stew of the field, and I'm going to make him a goat stew, which is a Hamish meal, kugel and cholent, and he's going to like it, and he's going to think, it's going to be so confusing to him. That's what's going on. Ilana Rosette. Ilana.
I think in the beginning of the marriage, we're talking a lot about Isaac and Rebekah. It's Rebekah thought that Isaac is strong enough to pray for them to have children. She asked him to pray to God when she was childless, when she couldn't have children. She didn't do it. She asked him. She asked Isaac to pray. So she believed. She believed in him.
She believed in him. Yeah. Go ahead. And then Susie.
Yeah. So she tells Yitzhak to go and get 2 goats because she needs to prepare this meal. It's a lot of meat. I mean,
It
like
is, unless you want the
one goat is
organ.
more than enough.
No, it's so hard to interpret that. It's a lot of meat, but it may be like special parts of the goat, kidneys or organs or other kinds of things, offal. And I don't need to go any further than that, which is where I would go, right? You can harvest only so much of some things from only so much of some animals. So that may be the case. Um, you know, and I think that that there's something going on there. Back to Ilana, when you said does the text really say what you said that he goes? Let's see what it says. He says Yitzchak entreated. So Vayatar Yitzchak Larona Lanochach Ishto. So you're saying that she told him to go and speak. Is that what you're saying, Ilana?
I think I read a commentary
Ah,
that
okay.
she did. She thought he's more in closer
Ah,
to
nice.
God or
Okay, okay.
something.
That's why I didn't understand.
And
Okay,
also because of what happened to him as a child, maybe God
right.
will
But,
listen to him more.
you can see here how, I mean, again, I'm going to read that he loves her. Okay, so he sees that she's suffering. Okay, uh, ויתר יצחק לאדוני לנוכח אשתו כי עקרה היא, ויתר לו אדוני ותר רבקה אשתו. So he takes the initiative to call God on her behalf. That's how much he loves her.
That's important.
Absolutely. Okay, folks, we will leave it there. I appreciate that. And we will be back again next week in Vayetze. All right. Have a good week, everybody. And we'll see you all. Bye bye.